Again, this is the 18th Sunday after Pentecost. It's also the first day of autumn, or as we know it in Phoenix as Summer Part B. We're glad you're here this morning. Most of the people are meeting over there to listen to the new pastor, Josh Schmidt, who is one of our pastoral candidates. We will have Frank, Schrank, Schmidt, and Schmidt. Sounds like a bad law firm, but hopefully things will work out in our view. We had been talking about, I brought over my class from over there, and we've been doing minor prophets. There are 12 minor prophets. They're not called minor because what they say is less than the other prophets. They're called minor prophets because they didn't write a whole lot. Some of them are only one chapter. Some are 3 chapters, mostly around that area. 50 verses. Easy read. It's just, you have to look at them first and study them. So we've gone over several of the prophets already. Hosea, God commanded him to marry a prostitute to show as an example of how Israel was treating God. Israel was the prostitute in the case because they were running after other gods instead of the one true God. We had Joel, who talked about a locust plague reflecting God's judgment. Joel 2:28 is also quoted by Peter at the Pentecost. Amos, a shepherd, he pointed out Israel's sin of idol worship, persecution of the prophets, and cheating the poor. Obadiah spoke about the sins of Edom. You remember Edom was one of the sons of Esau. Especially the ransacking of Jerusalem at the Babylon conquest. Jonah, everybody knows Jonah. You remember in Sunday school a long time ago the pictures of the big fish and everything. But as one commentator pointed out, Jonah is not about Jonah. Jonah is about God's love for those people. Those people are those people who are not like us, who we think aren't in our camp, who we judge not to be worthy to be with us. Those people. All the Ninevites. Nineveh was known for its cruelty in their conquest. And so when Jonah was told to preach to them, and they did convert, the whole city converted, it was pretty amazing, a great sign of God's love. Then we had Micah. Both Israel and Judah were going to suffer for their idolatry and injustice. In this book and many others, there is always hope for the remnant, the few that remain true to the faith. 2 great quotes in Micah. But thou, Bethany Ephrath, though thou be little among the thousands of Judah, yet out of thee shall come unto me, that is to be ruler in Israel. Nahum, who we just studied last week, prophesies that Nehemiah, the city that 100 years before Nahum had spoke, Jonah had saved and they converted. 100 years later, God's judgment's coming on to them because they reverted back to their wicked ways. So in 612 BC, Nineveh was destroyed. The Babylons and the Medes came over and completely took over the city. Nineveh was really dead from that point on, almost a Sodom and Gomorrah type thing. It wasn't rediscovered by archaeologists until 1842. So for a couple thousand years, it had been just buried. There was hardly anything there. Once the capital of the world, Nineveh at its peak was the greatest city in the known world, and it went to nothing in no time. So it makes you think about your belief in all these institutions and buildings and things that we look at. It would be inconceivable to us that all of a sudden Washington, D.C. would disappear or just be forgotten. And yet, it happened to Nineveh. So, today, we're in Habakkuk, 3 chapters. Not many people are named Habakkuk these days, and there isn't much reference to Habakkuk in the Bible. We don't know anything about him personally. We have a hard time figuring out where and when his prophecy came. But did you each get a handout? Okay. So, we don't have much background on him. Some guess that he may have been a singer at the temple because chapter 3 is really a psalm, and they use musical terms in it, Selah, and a couple others that he uses in his writings, and it indicates almost a psalm-like thing. It could have been imported into the Psalms. The first 2 chapters are a dialogue between Habakkuk and God, much like Job and God. Why is this book relevant today? Habakkuk asked the same questions of God that we ask today. Why does these things happen? Why does evil happen in the world? Why does the bad people not be punished for their sins? Why is there no justice? We can come to the same conclusion if you're not careful, but you have to understand God's purpose is a lot different than our purpose, and his timetable is a lot different than our timetable. So we will begin with Habakkuk, the first chapter, verse 1. The prophecy that Habakkuk the prophet received. That's important in that little short sentence, that this isn't from him, that he has received this from God. Some of the texts use the word oracle instead of prophecy. Why does God prophesize? He doesn't need to. He's going to do what he's going to do anyway. But prophecy is really grace to us in a manner. We get to know that God is in control. He says something and it comes to fruition. We can know that he is true, that he has all the attributes that we're looking for in a God. We don't have to run to idols that we make with our own hands. He shows us the way. And he tells people when he prophesies against them, you still have time to turn. You can turn. Nineveh did. There is time to be saved. So he begins, "How long, Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen? Or cry out to you violence, but you do not save? Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? Destruction and violence are before me. There is strife and conflict abounds. Therefore the law is paralyzed, and justice never prevails. The wicked hem in the righteous, so that justice is perverted." It gets so bad that we can't even enforce the law, is what he's saying. Paralyzed is an interesting term that he used. Here, he is crying out to God just like we do. We cry out to God. Have you ever railed against God? Have you ever just been so mad at the situation, angry, sad, depressed at a situation that you cry out to God? This is what Habakkuk is doing here for his people. This is what many of us do. And we cry out, and what do you think? What are you saying when you say stuff like this? Are you saying, God, you're ineffective? God, you can't do something? God, where are you? Do we hope for something else? God answers him, and this is a point of grace. God didn't have to answer Habakkuk to his questions. He didn't have to answer to Job when Job had questions about why is there evil, why is this happening to me. The Lord's answer: look at the nations and watch, be utterly amazed, for I am going to do something in your days that you would not believe, even if you were told. I am raising up the Babylons, the ruthless and impetuous people who sweep across the whole earth to seize dwellings not their own. They are a feared and dreaded people. They are a law to themselves, and they promote their own honor. Their horses are swifter than leopards, fiercer than wolves at dusk. The cavalry gallops headlong. Their horsemen come from afar. They fly like an eagle swooping to devour. They all come intent on violence. Their hordes advance like a desert wind and gather prisoners like sand. They mock kings and scoff at rulers. They laugh at all the fortified cities by building earthen ramps. They capture them. Then they sweep past like the wind and go on. Guilty people whose own strength is their God. That last little phrase is very important. Their own strength is their God. They trust in themselves. When things are going for you, how much do you need God? When things are right, how much do you call on God? Usually our prayers begin with, God, can you help me with something like this? Our prayers should begin just like the Lord's Prayer, with something of praise to our Father. Then we can ask him for our needs, once we realize that he's already given us so much. So these people's God is their own strength. Nobody's going to stand in their way. The Babylons have become famous. Probably you know that one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world was the Hanging Gardens of Babylonia. It was an impressive sight. And when you build this capital, like Babylon was, then why do you need a God? Things are going well. And when things go well, what do you need God for? In verse 12, Habakkuk's second complaint. Lord, are you not from everlasting? My God, my Holy One, you will never die. You, Lord, have appointed them to execute judgment. You, my rock, have ordained them to punish. Your eyes are too pure to look on evil. You cannot tolerate wrongdoing. Why then do you tolerate the treacherous? Why are you silent while the wicked swallow up those more righteous than themselves? You have made people like the fish in the sea, like the sea creatures that have no ruler. The wicked foe pulls them all up with hooks. He catches them in his net. He gathers them up in his dragnet. So he rejoices and is glad. Therefore he sacrifices to his nets and burns incense to his dragnet. For by his net he lives in luxury and enjoys the choicest food. Is he to keep on emptying his net, destroying nations without mercy? Again, Habakkuk is crying out to God for some justice in this world. God used a wicked nation to crush a wicked nation. We see that Nineveh had repented under Jonah. They converted, but fell again. But God used them first then, before he destroyed them, to take the northern kingdom, Israel, the 10 tribes in the northern. He exacted punishment on them. They came down, swept through, and cleaned out Samaria. Took the people, scattered them all over the Near East in that area. Then he had raised up the Babylonians, who came in and crushed Nineveh in 612 BC. And in turn, the Babylonians were destroyed. God used one wicked nation to exact his judgment on another wicked nation, paying for their sins, who exacted another justice on this other one. I think we just don't see the big picture. We look too much narrowly at what God does in this world. Keep trusting in him. All the stuff that we see now is happening is still in God's hands. It may not seem like it. War after war. I mean, you hear of maybe 2 major wars in the world, why there's 20 going on. I mean, there's 10 million refugees in Sudan now and on the brink of starvation. And you cry out, "Where are you, God?" Chapter 2. This first verse should probably be at the end of chapter 1. I will stand at my watch and station myself on the ramparts. I will look to see what he will say to me and what answer I am to give to this complaint. So then the Lord answers him. Then the Lord replied, "Write down the revelation and make it plain on tablets, so that a herald may run with it. For the revelation awaits an appointed time. It speaks of the end and will not prove false. Though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay." These are some of the characteristics of prophecy. That it has an appointed time. It speaks of the end and will be true. How do you tell a prophet is a true prophet? By what he says comes true. I mean, a lot of people can predict things, but I guess there was the famous one, I forgot his name, the guy that pointed the end of the world and had billboards up all the time. Said the end of the world is going to happen like 10 years ago. Well, we made a miscalculation because it didn't end, so we're going to move it 2 years, and then it didn't disappear again. The man was not a prophet, not sent from God. Then the Lord replied, "For the revelation awaits appointed time. It speaks of the end and will not prove false. Though it linger," which means not on our timetable, "wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay. See, the enemy is puffed up. His desires are not upright. But the righteous person will live by his faithfulness." In our Bible studies previously, we talked about this, is that northern Israel was conquered, and you say, those are sort of God's people. They weren't doing quite right. Judah, Jerusalem was conquered. Why did God allow that? What happened? Because corporately, they were not following God. Individually, there are people. I bring up frequently in our classes that I still take the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman. I use her as an example of a remnant of God's people that lasted through all this time because she still had faith in a Messiah. And then she found the Messiah, and her life was complete. But there's still remnants. Individually, all these people may have been conquered, but there were still believers in that group. You still are saved individually. Maybe not corporately. Maybe when we say America is God's country, is it? We won't get into that because that's a longer discussion than we can have today. But the question is that people in America will be saved. Some of them won't. But we're not going to go in as America to heaven. We're going to go in as individuals, faithful followers of our God. So, always individual. You can only save yourself. You can't save 300 million people in this country, but you can save yourself and drag as many as close to you as you can. Get them there. Indeed, now we're talking about the Babylons again in verse 5. Indeed, wine betrays him. He is arrogant and never at rest, because he is greedy as the grave, and death is never satisfied. Pretty descriptive. He gathers to himself all the nations and takes captive all the people. Will not all of them taunt him with ridicule and scorn, saying, and here we begin the first of 5 woes to these people. Woe to him who piles up stolen goods and makes himself wealthy by extortion. How long must this go on? Will not your creditors suddenly arise? Will not they wake up and make you tremble? Then you will become their prey. Because you have plundered many nations, the peoples who are left will plunder you. For you have shed human blood. You have destroyed lands and cities and everyone in them. When you fall, when you're at the top, there's not a lot of people that clap for you or are sad for you. They clap that you're gone. I think we had talked in our last Bible study is that how much tons of silver and gold that both the northern kingdoms and Judah, Jerusalem had sent to Nineveh. I mean, tons of silver as tribute to those people. Nineveh gets destroyed, and all their wealth is gone. It would be like somebody marching into this country and taking over Fort Knox, taking all our gold away. That would be pretty sensational. And it wouldn't be Goldfinger. Sorry, that's a bad reference. Verse 9. Woe to him who builds his house by unjust gain, setting his nest on high to escape the clutches of ruin. You have plotted the ruin of many people, shaming your own house and forfeiting your life. The stones of the wall will cry out, and the beams of the woodwork will echo it. He condemns the violence. God is condemning the violence that was used to make their own city. And that's what happens. They brought slaves, they brought all the gold and stuff so that they could build themselves their own tower, their own place. The third woe. Woe to him who builds a city on bloodshed and establishes a town by injustice. Has not the Lord Almighty determined that the people's labor is only fuel for the fire, that the nations exhaust themselves for nothing? For the earth will be filled with knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. So, instead of empire building, like they were doing, as Nebuchadnezzar, a king of Babylon, said in Daniel 4:30, is not this the great Babylon I have built as a royal resident by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty? A king so arrogant that he says he can do this and that he is his own God. He doesn't need any other. No wonder Babylon fell. For the earth will be filled with the glory of the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. The fourth woe. Woe to him who gives drink to his neighbors, pouring it from the wineskin till they are drunk, so that he can gaze upon their naked bodies. You will be filled with shame instead of glory. Now it is your turn. Drink and let your nakedness be exposed. The cup from the Lord's right hand is coming around to you, and disgrace will cover your glory. The violence you have done to Lebanon will overwhelm you, and your destruction of animals will terrify you, for you have shed human blood. You have destroyed lands and cities and everyone in them. Moral, depravity here. The fifth woe is the last part starting in verse 18. Of what value is an idol carved by a craftsman, or an image that teaches lies? For the one who makes its trust in his own creation, he makes idols that cannot speak. Woe to him who says to the wood, "Come to life," or to a lifeless stone, "Wake up." Can it give guidance? It is covered with gold and silver. There is no breath in it. The Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him. It is amazing that people had idols, and we think this is so stupid now, that they had idols that they set up and worship and waiting for them. And that all of a sudden you're going to pray to this idol and it's going to do what you say. I have trouble even keeping my kids in line, let alone an idol doing stuff for me. So, we have these 5 woes that God says to these people, and that is why judgment is going to come to Babylon. Because they have shown that they don't or want God. And that will take care of their moral problems. It's sort of amazing to me that we think this should happen quicker, but it took a long time. The Babylon, when they took over, swept down. Their problem was Egypt. It wasn't Jerusalem. Jerusalem's a byproduct. Jerusalem, that area, Judah, is just on the road to Egypt. The big kingdom was Egypt coming back, and now Nineveh's gone, which was Egypt's old foe. Now we have the Babylons. And so they travel hundreds of miles down to get to Egypt, and they fight. And it happens, just so happens, that Jerusalem's in the way here. And when they conquer Egypt at a large battle, the Battle of Kamkamish in 605 BC, that they conquer the Egyptians. On the way, they just sack Jerusalem. And this is when people are carried away. This is when Jerusalem falls. We tend to think Jerusalem and stuff was larger than it actually was, or that it was more powerful. But these other kingdoms were bigger, and they would come down and do it. Not since probably the days of Solomon had Jerusalem been a world power. Now they weren't. Chapter 3 of Habakkuk is Habakkuk's prayer. And it's more like, I said before, it's more like a psalm. Not only is it Habakkuk's prayer, but it's a teaching other believers about God. There's comfort for those in Jerusalem, and he remembers the past ways of God. Lord, I have heard of your fame. I stand in awe of your deeds. Lord, repent them in our day. Repeat them in our day. In our time, make them known. In wrath, remember mercy. God came from Teman, the Holy One from Mount Paran. His glory covered the heavens, and praise filled the earth. His splendor was like sunrise, rays flashing from his hand, where his power was hidden. Plague went before him, pestilence follows his steps. He stood and shook the earth. He looked and made the nations tremble. The ancient mountains crumbled, and age-old hills collapsed, but he marches on forever. I saw the tents of Cushan in distress, the dwellings of Midian in anguish. Were you angry with the rivers, Lord? Was your wrath against the streams? Did you rage against the sea when you rode your horses and your chariots to victory? You uncovered your bow, you called for many arrows. You split the earth with rivers. The mountains saw you and withered. Torrents of water swept by. The deep roared and lifted its waves on high. Sun and moon stood still in the heavens at the glint of your flying arrows, at the lightning of your flashing spear. In wrath you strode through the earth, and in anger you threshed the nations. You came out to deliver your people, to save your anointed one. You crushed the leader of the land of wickedness. You stripped him from head to foot. With his own spear you pierced his head when his warriors stormed out to scatter us, gloating as though about to devour the wretched who were in hiding. You trampled the sea with your horses, churning the waters. I heard and my heart pounded. My lips quivered at the sound. Decay crept into my bones and my legs trembled. Yet I waited patiently for the days of calamity to come on the nation invading us. Though the fig tree does not bud and there are no grapes on the vines, though the olive crop fails and the fields produce no food, there will be no sheep in the pen and no cattle in the stalls. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in God my Savior. The sovereign Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like the feet of a deer. He enables me to tread on the heights. Why and how does he rejoice when things are so bleak? The last part, yet I will be joyful in God my Savior. He understands what faith is. The summary voice, I think, of Habakkuk is found in chapter 2, verse 4. And it's the second part of that verse. But the righteous person will live by his faithfulness. So that, I think, is the important verse in this book. So, a question I have is, what do we do in the face of all this? What does this mean to us today? How do we handle this when we have injustice, when we know that injustice is being done now? When things aren't fair, when evil triumphs and stuff like this. I've railed against God. I've had my problems with him. And yet, by railing against God, you're still talking to God. You haven't put him out of the equation. You still remember that he is God. Why would you talk to him if he couldn't help you? It would be like an idol. But we still look for help in the Lord, even in our distress. I think all of us have gone through personal crises, deaths, injuries, disease, stuff like this. And we ask the questions why. I did at the death of our daughter. I railed against God for a long time. Why? So, when you call out to God and ask why, I will urge you to write that down. I think it's an act of faith writing it down. But write it down. And then review that later. And I think that you will see how God has acted to answer your questions of why these things happen. Habakkuk found peace at the end. He knew that God was still in control. And I think that you would see too, if you wrote this down, write all your complaints against God down, and go back and look at them sometime later. Remember, it's not on your timetable. You may not be able to fill out those how you see God has acted the next day or the day after, the month after. It may be some time. But later on, I think that you would be able to go back and you would see God's hand and how he has acted towards you. I don't think you'll ever be disappointed. I think you'll be able to go back and look at that and see, God, you are still God in heaven, and you control all, and I can put my trust in you forever. That's pretty much what I see Habakkuk. That's what we're doing over there in the Minor Prophet study. We're going to tackle another name that we don't name our kids anymore next week, Zephaniah. Don't see too many kids that name that either. Micah and Joel are big names, but not Habakkuk. So we will do that next week. For now, let me get the script here because I have to figure out what order we do stuff here in this thing. I think we're going to have the Lord's Prayer. And I think it's a fitting conclusion to our study today, is that first in the Lord's Prayer, that we first praise Him, and then we talk about our needs. Do we have that up? We will begin. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Now for the benediction. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace. And now we have a hymn.